There are moments that split your life into before and after. The day you get married, the day your child is born, and the day you discover your own son's voice on a hospital phone saying, "If she's going to die, she's going to die. Call me in the morning if she's still breathing." That was October 15th, 8:47 p.m. I was lying in a cardiac unit bed at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, tubes in my arms, monitors beeping around me like a broken symphony. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils and my mouth tasted like copper pennies and fear. The nurse had just stepped into the hallway to call my emergency contact, my son David, the boy I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was 4. The man I'd worked 3 jobs to put through Duke University, the successful real estate developer who now lived in a mansion in Myers Park while I scraped by in a 2-bedroom ranch house. I could hear every word through those paper-thin hospital walls. The nurse's voice, professional but urgent. "Mr. Henderson, this is Nurse Patricia at Presbyterian Hospital. Your mother, Margaret Henderson, is here. She suffered a massive cardiac event. Yes, sir, it's very serious. The doctors aren't sure she'll make it through the night." My heart monitor started racing, not from the medical crisis, but from anticipation. This was it. The moment when my 40-year investment in motherhood would pay dividends. When all those sacrifices, the second mortgages to fund his business ventures, the co-signed loans, the $750,000 I'd given him over the years, would finally mean something. But what came through that phone made my blood freeze in my veins. "Look, I'm at dinner with clients at the Capitol Grill. Do you know how hard these reservations are to get? Besides, Mom doesn't have much time left anyway. If she's going to die, she's going to die. Just call me tomorrow morning if she's still alive." The line went dead, and with it something inside me died too. But here's what my son David didn't know what he couldn't have known. Before I was a doormat mother, before I became his personal ATM, I was Margaret Henderson, senior paralegal at the biggest law firm in Charlotte. I knew contracts, I understood power of attorney, and I remembered everything. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered if your love is being taken for granted, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about a mother's revenge, it's about what happens when a woman finally stops apologizing for taking up space in her own life. And by the time I was finished, David learned something he should have figured out years ago. You never underestimate a 70-year-old woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. 7 days later, I walked out of Presbyterian Hospital under my own power, and I had never felt more dangerous in my life. The cardiac episode had been caused by stress and exhaustion, 36 years of putting everyone else's needs first, while mine gathered dust like unopened mail. Dr. Rodriguez said with lifestyle changes and medication, I could live another 25 years. 25 years. More than enough time for what I had planned. David hadn't visited once during my week-long stay. Not once. The nurses tried to hide their disgust, but I saw it in their sideways glances every time visiting hours ended and my room remained empty. Other patients had flowers wilting on windowsills, balloons bobbing from ceiling hooks, and family members who camped out in uncomfortable vinyl chairs. I had medical charts and a fury that burned brighter each day. On day 3, he sent a generic get well card from the hospital gift shop. Not even a personal message, just his signature. David, not Love David or Your Son David, just his name like he was signing a business contract. But his neglect was actually a gift. It gave me time to think, to plan, to remember exactly who I was dealing with. I thought about David's wedding day when his wife Sophia had made it clear my presence was an embarrassment. How I'd been seated in the back row, treated like a distant relative rather than the mother of the groom. How Sophia had forgotten to include me in family photos, claiming my off-the-rack dress wouldn't photograph well next to their designer everything. I thought about all the birthdays where I was an afterthought, the holidays where I was uninvited because I wouldn't fit in with their country club crowd. Most of all, I thought about the money. For 36 years, I'd been David's safety net. When he needed capital for his first real estate flip, I took out a second mortgage on my house. When he wanted to start his development company, I liquidated my entire retirement account. When he and Sophia bought their estate in Myers Park, I provided the down payment from my late husband's life insurance. Over the years, I'd given him nearly $750,000. Not loans, gifts. Because that's what mothers do, right? They sacrifice everything and expect nothing in return except love and respect, except basic human decency, except showing up when your mother is dying in a hospital bed. On my final night at Presbyterian, staring out at Charlotte's skyline through the industrial window, I made a decision that would change everything. David thought I was weak. He thought I was disposable. He thought my only value was the checkbook I carried and the problems I could solve with money. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The first thing I did after getting home was shower and put on my best black suit, the one I'd worn to my husband Robert's funeral 12 years ago. It still fit perfectly and the color seemed appropriate for what I was about to do. The second thing I did was call my bank. First Citizens, this is Jennifer speaking. Jennifer, this is Margaret Henderson. I need to schedule an emergency meeting with Mr. Patterson. Kenneth Patterson had been my banker for 18 years. He'd watched me scrape together every penny, had approved every loan I'd taken to support David's dreams. He knew exactly what my financial sacrifices had cost me. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be perfect. Can you see me this afternoon? Absolutely. 2 o'clock. Perfect. At exactly 2:00 p.m., I walked into First Citizens Bank wearing my black suit and my most confident smile. Kenneth greeted me with the concern of an old friend. Margaret, I heard about your hospital stay. How are you feeling? Like a woman who's finally waking up from a very long sleep, Kenneth. For the next hour, we went through my accounts, my investments, my assets. Everything laid out in neat columns that told the story of a woman who'd spent her entire adult life putting everyone else first. I want to make some changes, Kenneth, significant changes. What kind of changes? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I want to liquidate everything. Savings accounts, CDs, the mutual funds, all of it. I want new accounts that only I can access. Kenneth looked concerned. Margaret, that's very drastic. Are you sure you've thought this through? I've had a week in a hospital bed to think about it. I've never been more sure of anything. What about David? Doesn't he have access to some of these accounts? Not anymore. As we filled out the paperwork, my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen, his professional headshot from his company's website, all perfect veneers and false confidence. I declined the call and watched Kenneth's eyebrows rise. By 4:00 p.m., everything was done. Every account David had access to was closed, every joint investment was liquidated, every safety net I'd provided was gone. My phone had rung 23 times. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The first phase of my plan was complete. Now came the real entertainment. My phone rang for the 24th time as I pulled into my driveway. I let it go to voicemail, went inside, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat down to listen to the messages. The first few were confused. Mom, the bank called about some account changes. Call me back. By message 7, confusion had turned to concern. Mom, seriously, I need you to call me. They're saying you closed our joint accounts. By message 12, concern had become panic. What the hell is going on? The bank won't tell me anything. Call me now. The most recent message was pure desperation. Mom, please. I don't understand what's happening. Are you having some kind of breakdown? I'm coming over. I checked the timestamp. 20 minutes ago. Perfect timing. Within minutes, I heard the screech of tires in my driveway, followed by a car door slamming like a gunshot. My front door rattled under urgent knocks. Mom, are you in there? I took a sip of my tea, savoring the moment, then walked slowly to the door and opened it with the most innocent smile I could muster. David stood on my porch, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his face flushed with panic. Behind him, Sophia waited in their white Mercedes, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses and obvious irritation. David, I said warmly, what a pleasant surprise. Please come in. He pushed past me into the living room, eyes wild. Mom, what's going on? The bank called and said you've been making major account changes. They said you liquidated everything. I closed the door gently and turned to face him. Would you like some tea? You look upset. I don't want tea, I want answers. What have you done? I settled into my favorite armchair, the one I'd bought used 15 years ago because I couldn't afford new furniture after paying for his MBA at Wharton. I've taken control of my finances, dear. At my age, it's important to be organized. Organized. His voice cracked. Mom, you've closed accounts that I need access to. The business operating account, the emergency fund. Those were my accounts. Those were my accounts, David. You just use them. But I need them. You know I need them. I know you use them. That's exactly the problem. He stared at me like I was speaking Mandarin. The concept that I might not want him to have unlimited access to my money had apparently never occurred to him. Mom, I don't understand. We've always shared accounts. It's practical. If something happens to you, I can handle your finances. Something did happen to me, David. The words hung in the air like a blade. Where were you? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. I'll tell you where you were. I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. You were at the Capitol Grill enjoying a $300 dinner while your mother lay dying in a hospital bed. Mom, that's not fair. I didn't know it was that serious. The nurse told you they weren't sure I'd make it through the night. She was probably being dramatic. Nurses always exaggerate. I set down my teacup and really looked at my son. When had the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms turned into this cold, calculating stranger who thought dinner reservations were more important than his mother's life? David, let me ask you something. When was the last time you visited me? Not when you needed something. Not when you wanted money, just to see how I was doing. He shifted uncomfortably. I've been busy with the business. It's been 11 months. 11 months since you set foot in this house, unless you needed something from me. That's not true. It is true. The last time you were here was last November when you needed me to co-sign for Sophia's new Porsche. The memory clearly stung because he looked away. Mom, you're being unfair. I care about you. Do you? Because when the hospital called and told you I might die, your response was that I didn't have much time anyway. David's face went white. How do you? The nurse told me, along with the rest of your charming response about being too busy for your dying mother. I was in shock. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I laughed and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. David, darling, you've spent 34 years showing me exactly who you are. Last week, I finally started believing you. What's that supposed to mean? I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd raised him as a single mother, working double shifts to keep food on the table and clothes on his back. It means I'm done. Done being your bank. Done being your safety net. Done being taken for granted by a son who thinks so little of me that he won't interrupt dinner for my deathbed. Mom, you're being dramatic. Tell me, David, what was the first thing you thought when the hospital called Be Honest? He was quiet for a long moment. I thought about how inconvenient the timing was. And the second thing, another pause. I wondered if you'd updated your will recently. The admission hung between us like poison gas. Finally, the truth. There it is, I said softly. Your dying mother was an inconvenience and your inheritance was a concern. Not once did you think about rushing to my side. Not once did you think about holding my hand or telling me you loved me. You thought about money and timing. Mom, I do love you. No, David. You love what I can do for you. You love my bank account, my credit rating, my willingness to solve your problems with my checkbook. But you don't love me. I turned back to face him, and for the first time in his adult life, my son looked genuinely afraid. The accounts you're so worried about, they're gone. Moved to new banks, new account numbers, new everything. The credit cards you use that are linked to my accounts canceled. The business loan I co-signed for your latest development project, I've contacted Fifth Third Bank about removing my name. You can't do that. I already have. David sank onto my couch, head in his hands. Mom, why are you doing this? I know I made a mistake, but you can't just cut me off. The business depends on those accounts. Our mortgage is backed by your credit. Our whole life is built on me. Your whole life is built on me, and you've treated me like garbage for years because you thought I would always be there to clean up your messes. That's not true. Isn't it? Tell me, David. When was the last time you called me just to say hello? When was the last time you invited me to dinner? When was the last time you included me in your life as anything other than a financial resource? He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. I thought so. Now I suggest you go home and figure out how to live within your actual means instead of mine. David stood up, his face a mixture of panic and rage. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll have you declared incompetent. I smiled coldly. You'll what, David? Prove to a court that I'm mentally unfit because I finally stopped letting you steal from me. Good luck with that. He stormed toward the door, then turned back one last time. This isn't over, Mom. I smiled, and it was the coldest expression of my life. You're absolutely right, dear. It's not over. It's just beginning. But what David didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd spent the past week doing more than just moving money around. I'd been investigating, and what I discovered about my son's real life, his secret affairs, his fraudulent business practices, and the web of lies he'd built around our family would make our little banking dispute look like a parking ticket. The real reckoning was just getting started. 2 weeks after our confrontation, I was sitting in my garden reading when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me smile. Sarah Mitchell, my college roommate, who'd become one of Charlotte's most successful private investigators. Margaret Henderson. Sarah's voice was warm with surprise. It's been way too long. How are you? I'm having the best month of my life, actually. Sarah, I need your help with something. Professional help. What's going on? I told her everything. The hospital, the phone call, the years of being taken for granted, the money I'd given freely only to be treated like an inconvenience when I was literally dying. Jesus, Margaret, I'm so sorry. What exactly do you want me to find? Everything. His business dealings, his finances, his marriage, his lifestyle. I've been supporting him for years, but I don't actually know what he's been doing with my money. You suspect he's been hiding something. I suspect I've been blind to a lot of things. Can you help me? I'll start immediately. Give me 2 weeks. While Sarah began her investigation, I started my own research. I'd been so trusting, so willing to write checks without asking questions, that I realized I knew almost nothing about my son's actual financial situation. What I discovered in just 5 days of digging through public records made my blood boil. David's development company, Henderson Properties, which I'd helped him start with $200,000 of my retirement money, was doing phenomenally well. His client list included several major corporations relocating to Charlotte, and his annual revenue was over $3.2 million. The estate in Myers Park that I'd helped them buy was now worth $2.4 million, triple what they'd paid for it 6 years ago. Sophia's career as a lifestyle influencer was also more lucrative than they'd let me believe. She had over 800,000 followers on Instagram and commanded $75,000 for a single sponsored post. They weren't struggling, they were wealthy. And yet they continued to use my credit cards for emergencies. Continued to ask for loans they never intended to repay. Continued to treat me like their personal ATM while living like millionaires. But the real revelation came when I looked at their social media accounts. Sophia's Instagram was a carefully curated showcase of luxury designer handbags worth more than most people's cars, exotic vacations, to places I'd never even dreamed of visiting, jewelry that cost more than I spent on groceries in a year. What made me physically sick was realizing that I had paid for most of it. The $95,000 kitchen renovation they'd done last spring charged to one of my credit cards as a family emergency. The European river cruise they'd taken for their anniversary, also on my card, justified as a necessary break for David's mental health. Sophia's collection of Louis Vuitton bags, each one represented a different crisis that had required my immediate financial intervention. I scrolled through months of posts, seeing my money transformed into social media content designed to make others envious of their success. They weren't just taking my money, they were flaunting it while pretending to be self-made. But the post that shattered my heart was from the night I was in the hospital. Sophia had posted a picture of their dinner at the Capitol Grill, date night at Charlotte's finest. Sometimes you have to treat yourself to the best. Blessed date night, living our best life. The timestamp showed it was posted at 11:52 p.m., exactly when I was lying alone in a cardiac unit, wondering if I would live through the night. The comments were full of people praising their success and asking about their secret to affording such luxury. Sophia had responded with heart emojis and vague references to hard work and smart investments. Smart investments like investing in a mother-in-law stupid enough to fund your lifestyle while you treated her like dirt. When Sarah called me 2 weeks later, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Margaret, we need to meet in person. What I found, you're not going to like it." We met at a small cafe in Dilworth, the same neighborhood where we used to study for exams 35 years ago. Sarah looked exactly like what she was, a successful woman who didn't suffer fools. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp bob, her eyes were intelligent and kind, and her expression was grim. "How bad is it?" I asked before she could even sit down. "Worse than you think." She opened a thick file folder. "Margaret, your son isn't just financially irresponsible. He's been actively defrauding you." "What do you mean?" "Remember that emergency loan you gave him last year for his business, the $85,000 for essential equipment?" "Of course. He said he needed new construction machinery." Sarah slid a photo across the table. It showed David and Sophia boarding a private jet, all smiles and designer luggage. "This was taken 3 days after you transferred the money. They spent your $85,000 on a 2-week vacation in the Maldives." I stared at the photo, feeling sick. But he showed me invoices for the equipment. Fake. Very good fakes, but fake nonetheless. My guess is he has someone creating false documentation for these emergencies. She pulled out more photos, more documents. Each one was another knife in my back. The emergency medical bills for Sophia's supposed surgery. She'd gotten elective cosmetic procedures, a nose job, and breast augmentation. The business crisis that required immediate cash injection. They'd bought a beach house in Kiawa Island. The tax emergency that threatened his company. They'd purchased a boat. "Margaret, in the past 4 years alone, you've given him over $500 in what you thought were emergency loans and business investments. He spent every penny on luxury items and lifestyle expenses." I felt like I was drowning. But surely some of it went to legitimate expenses. Some. "But Margaret, here's what's really going to upset you. He's been telling people, including his wife, that this money comes from his business success. He's been claiming credit for a lifestyle that you're funding." "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a video. It was David speaking at some kind of Chamber of Commerce event. "The key to success in real estate development is making smart investments and living below your means until you can afford to live above them. Sophia and I saved aggressively in our 20s, and now we're able to enjoy the fruits of our labor. I watched my son take credit for achievements bought with my money, watched him present himself as a self-made success story, while his audience applauded his wisdom." "There's more," Sarah said gently. "Margaret, he's been using your credit to secure business loans. Your excellent credit rating has guaranteed financing that he never could have gotten on his own." "Is that legal?" "Technically, yes, since you co-signed. But morally, he's built his entire business on your foundation while telling everyone, including you, that he's self-sufficient." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. It wasn't just the money. It was the lies, the manipulation, the complete disrespect for everything I'd sacrificed. "Sarah, there's something else I need to know." "What?" "The night I was in the hospital. Can you find out what they were really doing?" She was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, are you sure you want to know?" "I'm sure." She pulled out another set of photos. David and Sophia at the Capitol Grill, laughing and toasting with champagne. The timestamp showed these were taken during the exact hours when I was fighting for my life. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the third person at their table. A blonde woman, maybe 28, stunning in the way that only youth and money can achieve. She was sitting very close to David, her hand on his arm, their body language intimate and familiar. "Who is she?" I asked, though I already knew. "Her name is Jessica Martinez. She's a marketing consultant. And Margaret, she's been having an affair with David for over 18 months. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David hadn't just been stealing my money and lying about it. He'd been cheating on his wife while using my funds to pay for his affairs. That night at the Capitol Grill wasn't a romantic dinner with Sophia. It was David with both his wife and his mistress celebrating together while his mother lay dying. "There's more," Sarah said softly. Sophia knows about the affair. She knows. Not only does she know she's okay with it, apparently they have some kind of arrangement. She gets to maintain her lifestyle and social status, and he gets to play around. As long as the money keeps flowing, everyone's happy. I stared at the photos of my son, his wife, and his mistress, all smiling and toasting while I fought for my life, and I felt something inside me turn to pure ice. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was disposable. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Sarah, I said, my voice deadly calm, I need you to keep investigating. I want to know everything. Every affair, every lie, every penny they've stolen. I want documentation of all of it. What are you planning? I smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had finally seen her enemies clearly. I'm planning to remind my son that the woman he dismissed as dying and irrelevant still has a few tricks up her sleeve. The next 3 weeks were the most productive of my life. While David left increasingly frantic voicemails and Sophia sent passive-aggressive text messages about my cruel behavior, I was busy orchestrating their downfall with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. First, I met with Kenneth Patterson at the bank again. This time I brought Sarah's investigation file. Kenneth, I need to ask you about the loans and credit lines that David has secured using my credit rating. Kenneth looked uncomfortable. Margaret, those are legitimate financial instruments. You co-signed for them. I understand that, but I was wondering if my financial situation were to change dramatically, how would that affect his ability to maintain those loans? What kind of changes are you talking about? I smiled. Hypothetically, if I were to transfer my assets offshore or put them in trust or make other arrangements that remove them from my accessible net worth, his loans would be called in immediately. Banks require co-signers to maintain a certain level of liquidity. If you no longer qualified as a guarantor, he would have to pay everything back at once or lose the collateral. Exactly. And if he couldn't pay, foreclosure, repossession, bankruptcy most likely. I nodded. Thank you, Kenneth. That's very helpful information. Next, I visited my attorney, Patricia Thornton, a sharp woman in her 60s, who'd handled my legal affairs since Robert's death. Patricia, I need to make some changes to my will. Of course. What kind of changes? I want to remove David as my beneficiary. Patricia's eyebrows rose. Margaret, that's a significant decision. Are you sure? I handed her a summary of Sarah's investigation. I'm certain. As she read, her expression grew darker. Good God, Margaret, this is financial abuse. It's about to become financial justice. We spent the next 4 hours crafting a new will that would ensure David received exactly what he deserved, nothing. Instead, my estate would be divided between the local animal shelter, where I'd volunteered for years, the women's shelter, where I now plan to donate my time, and Sarah's daughter, who was struggling to pay for medical school. There's one thing I want to leave David, I told Patricia. What's that? A letter. To be read aloud at the will reading. I want him to know exactly why he's been disinherited. What do you want the letter to say? I smiled. That's going to take some time to compose. I want it to be perfect. While Patricia prepared the legal documents, I began phase 2 of my plan documentation. I had saved every email, every text message, every voicemail from David over the years. Reading through them now with clear eyes, I could see the pattern of manipulation that I'd been blind to before. Every contact was a request for money disguised as a family interaction. Every I love you was followed by a request for a loan. Every emergency was carefully timed to maximize my emotional vulnerability. I compiled it all into a comprehensive file, the financial records, the false invoices, the evidence of the affairs, the social media posts flaunting wealth they hadn't earned. It painted a picture of 2 people who had systematically exploited a woman's love for her child. But I wasn't done yet. I hired a forensic accountant to trace exactly where my money had gone, every vacation, every purchase, every luxury item. I wanted a complete accounting of how my life savings had been transformed into their lifestyle accessories. The report was damning. In 6 years, David and Sophia had spent over $900,000 of my money on non-essential expenses: cars, jewelry, travel, clothes, restaurants, entertainment. They'd been living like millionaires on my dime while pretending to be struggling young professionals. Meanwhile, I'd been eating generic groceries and delaying medical checkups because I thought I needed to save money for their next emergency. The forensic accountant also discovered something interesting. David had been claiming business tax deductions for expenses I'd paid for personally. He was essentially getting tax breaks for spending my money. Mrs. Henderson, the accountant said during our final meeting, "This is tax fraud. You could report him to the IRS." "I'm keeping that option in reserve," I replied. "But first, I want to handle this my way." During this time, David's attempts to contact me became increasingly desperate. When I stopped answering his calls, he started showing up at my house. When I stopped answering the door, he began leaving gifts on my porch. Flowers, chocolates, expensive wine, all purchased, no doubt, with credit cards I was no longer paying for. The gifts were accompanied by notes that started apologetic and grew increasingly manipulative. "Mom, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Let's talk." "Mom, I know you're upset, but we can work this out. Family is everything." "Mom, Sophia is pregnant. Your grandchild needs their grandmother." That last note was particularly pathetic. I knew from Sarah's investigation that Sophia had been seen at a fertility clinic, but the timing was suspicious. A convenient pregnancy, just when their financial support was threatened. How coincidental. I threw all the gifts in the trash without opening them. 4 weeks into my new financial independence, I got a call that made me smile. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Marcus Chen from Wells Fargo Commercial Banking. I'm calling about the account linked to David Henderson. We've been trying to reach him about some irregularities in his payment history." "What kind of irregularities?" "Well, his account was backed by your credit profile, but we've been notified that you've closed the associated accounts. His payment this month was declined." "I see. We'll need him to provide alternative payment arrangements within 72 hours or we'll begin collection procedures." "That sounds like his problem, not mine." "Ma'am, you were the co-signer." "I was. Past tense. I've contacted all relevant institutions about removing my name from his obligations. You should have received the documentation." There was a pause. "Yes, we did receive that. Ma'am, can I ask, is there some kind of family dispute? This is very unusual." "Young man, let me give you some advice. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. My son showed me exactly who he was, and I finally listened." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Sarah. "How's the investigation going?" "I've got enough material to write a book. Your son's been busier than I thought." "What do you mean?" "The affair with Jessica. It's not his first. I found evidence of at least 4 other women over the past 3 years. He's been using your money to maintain multiple relationships." I felt sick, but not surprised. "What else?" "He's been telling each of these women that he's getting divorced. Apparently, he's promised to leave Sophia for at least 3 of them. And Sophia knows. Sophia knows and doesn't care, as long as he's discreet and the money keeps coming. But Margaret, here's the interesting part, she's been having her own affairs. 4 different men in the past 2 years. One of them is married to her best friend." I sat back in my chair, amazed by the depth of the deception. They're both cheating. It gets better. They've been selling some of the expensive gifts you've bought them. Remember that Rolex you gave David for his birthday? He sold it and used the money for a weekend getaway with Jessica. He sold his father's watch. The Rolex was new, but I was thinking of something else, something that made my heart break all over again. "Margaret, I have to ask, did you give him anything else valuable? Something with sentimental value?" My throat constricted. "My husband's vintage Omega. It belonged to Robert's grandfather. I gave it to David when he graduated from Duke." "I'm sorry, Margaret. He pawned it 6 months ago for $4,000. The watch had been Robert's most treasured possession, passed down through 3 generations. I'd given it to David as a symbol of family legacy and love. He'd pawned it for affair money. Sarah, I need you to find out where he sold it. I want it back." "Already on it. I should have the information by tomorrow." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went out to dinner alone at the nicest restaurant in Charlotte. I wore my best dress, my finest jewelry, and I treated myself to everything I'd denied myself while supporting their luxury lifestyle. The meal was exquisite, the service impeccable, and the company myself was delightful. As I was leaving, I saw a familiar couple at a corner table, David and Jessica, his latest mistress. They were leaning close together, whispering intimately, her hand stroking his arm. He looked stressed, older than his 34 years, the weight of his crumbling world evident in his hunched shoulders. He didn't see me, but I took a photo with my phone, evidence for the collection. The next morning, I received a package from Sarah. Inside was Robert's watch, recovered from the pawn shop where David had sold it for a fraction of its value. I held it in my hands, remembering the day I'd given it to my son, how proud Robert would have been to see his legacy passed down to the next generation. David had thrown that legacy away for the price of a weekend with his mistress. As I fastened the watch around my own wrist, I made a decision. It was time for the final phase of my plan. It was time to let David know exactly how much trouble he was in. The envelope arrived at David's office on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier with instructions that it must be signed for personally. Inside was a single photograph and a note written in my careful handwriting. "David, I thought you should know that your mother isn't as weak or as blind as you believed. Some family secrets are harder to keep than others. Love, Mom. P.S. Jessica looks lovely in red. I hope the dinner was worth it." The photograph was the one I'd taken of him with his mistress at the restaurant, clear and undeniably damning. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. I let it ring. By noon, David was pounding on my front door again. This time I opened it. "Mom, we need to talk." How lovely, please come in." He followed me into the living room, his face pale and desperate. "Mom, about that photo." "Which photo, dear? I have so many these days." "You know which photo? The one you sent to my office." "Oh, that photo. Yes, isn't it nice you both look so happy together? Though I have to say, the lighting in that restaurant really doesn't do justice to Jessica's complexion." David stared at me like I'd grown a second head. This was not the mother he knew, the woman who pretended not to notice his affairs, who never confronted him about anything, who absorbed his cruelty with martyred silence. "How long have you known?" "About Jessica specifically, a few weeks. About your affairs in general, much longer than you think." "Mom, I can explain." "Can you?" "This should be fascinating. Please explain to me how a man who is too busy to visit his dying mother finds time to maintain multiple affairs while using her money to pay for them." He sat down heavily on my couch. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is. Let me simplify it for you. You're a liar, a cheat, and a thief. How's that for uncomplicated?" "Mom, you don't understand. My marriage to Sophia is a sham. Yes, I know. I know she's having affairs too. I know you've both been using my money to fund your separate romantic adventures while pretending to be a happy couple." David's mouth fell open. How could I possibly know that, David, darling, you've spent years treating me like I'm stupid. The truth is, I'm not stupid. I was just in love with the idea of having a son who cared about me. I walked to my desk and pulled out the thick folder Sarah had compiled. However, private investigators don't suffer from maternal delusions. They deal in facts. You hired a private investigator. I hired the best private investigator in North Carolina. Would you like to see her report? I opened the folder and began reading from the summary page. Subject: David Michael Henderson. Age 34. Occupation: real estate developer. Marital status: married to Sophia Chen Henderson, though both parties maintain extramarital relationships with the full knowledge of the other party. David's face was ashen. Financial status appears successful, but is entirely dependent on financial support from his mother. Subject has systematically defrauded said mother of approximately $900,000 over the past 6 years through false emergency claims and fabricated business expenses. Mom, please. Shall I continue? There's a lovely section about your tax fraud. Did you know that claiming personal expenses as business deductions is illegal? Particularly when those personal expenses were paid by someone else. David stood up abruptly. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. Yes, you are. And that's exactly why this is so heartbreaking. I closed the folder and looked at him, really looked at him. David, when did you become this person? When did you decide that having a mother who loved you unconditionally was a weakness to exploit rather than a gift to treasure? I never thought of it that way. Didn't you then explain to me why in 6 years of marriage you've never once invited me to dinner at your house? Explain why the only time you call me is when you need money. Explain why you dismissed me as dying and irrelevant when the hospital called." He was quiet for a long moment. "I guess I took you for granted." "You guess you did. You took me for granted. But David, I do love you." "No, David. You love what I could do for you. You love my bank account, my credit rating, my willingness to solve your problems with my checkbook. But you don't love me." "That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my health without needing something? When was the last time you called just to say hello? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life that wasn't related to my ability to give you money?" He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. "I'll tell you when, David. Never. In your entire adult life, you have never once treated me as a person worthy of love and respect. I was a resource to be managed, a problem to be solved when I became inconvenient." I stood and walked to the window. "Even now, when you're trying to apologize, you're not really apologizing. You're trying to restore access to my money." "Fine." His composure finally cracked. "Yes, I need the money. Is that what you want to hear? My business depends on it. My marriage depends on it. My whole life depends on it. Without your support, I'll lose everything." "There it is," I said softly. "The truth at last. Mom, please. I know I've been a terrible son, but you can't just cut me off. I'll do better. I promise I'll change." "Will you prove it?" "How?" I pulled out a sheet of paper from the folder. "This is a list of every false emergency, every fabricated crisis, every lie you've told me to get money over the past 6 years. I want you to go through each item and explain to me what the money was really used for." David looked at the list, and I watched his face cycle through emotions: shame, anger, desperation, and finally resignation. "Mom, I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because it would prove that you're right about me." The admission hung between us like a confession in church. "David, I already know I'm right about you. The question is whether you're capable of acknowledging what you've become and doing something about it." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the list of his deceptions. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want my son back. The little boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. The teenager who was so proud when he got his first job. The young man who called me crying when his father died because he was afraid he wouldn't know how to be a man without him." Tears were forming in David's eyes. "I remember that person." "Do you? Because I haven't seen him in years. All I see now is a stranger who treats me like an ATM with an inconvenient personality attached." "How do I get him back?" I looked out at the neighborhood where I'd raised him, where I'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I'd never had. "I don't know if you can, David. That person was honest. He was grateful. He understood that love isn't something you take for granted. I can learn to be that person again. Can you? Because it's not just about changing your behavior with me. It's about becoming someone who's capable of authentic relationships with anyone." "What do you mean?" "David, your marriage is built on lies and mutual exploitation. You're both cheating, you're both pretending, you're both using other people to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford. How exactly do you plan to build an authentic relationship with me when you can't even have one with your own wife?" "Sophia and I, our relationship is complicated. Your relationship is fake. Your business partners masquerading as spouses, and not very convincing ones at that. Maybe you're right, but Mom, I can't fix everything at once. Can't we start with us?" I looked at my son, this man who had hurt me so deeply, but who was also the child I had raised and loved, and felt my resolve weaken for just a moment. Then I remembered the hospital, the phone call, the dismissive cruelty in his voice as he chose dinner reservations over his dying mother. "David, I want you to leave now." "Mom, I want you to go home and think very carefully about the man you've become. I want you to think about what you're willing to sacrifice to change that. And if I can't change, what if I try, but I can't become the person you want me to be?" I smiled, and it was the saddest smile of my life. "Then you'll have learned something important about consequences, won't you?" 3 months later, I was living the life I should have been living all along. Without David and Sophia draining my resources, I wasn't just comfortable, I was thriving. I had hired a housekeeper, joined a book club, and started volunteering at the women's shelter 3 days a week. I'd bought myself a new car, a beautiful silver Lexus that I drove with the windows down and the music up. Most importantly, I'd started dating. His name was Thomas, a retired engineer who treated me like I was precious instead of convenient. We met at the book club, bonded over our shared love of mystery novels, and discovered that companionship in your 70s could be just as sweet as romance in your 20s. The house that David and Sophia had been so proud of foreclosed on after 6 months. They'd moved into a modest apartment in a less fashionable part of town, both of them working regular jobs for the first time in years. David's business had collapsed when word got out about his financial difficulties. Clients don't trust developers who can't manage their own money. Sophia's influencer career had evaporated when her lifestyle became unaffordable. Her followers had moved on to shinier, more successful personalities. I felt no guilt about their situation. They were simply experiencing the natural consequences of their choices without my interference. But on a cold February morning, my peaceful new routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. I was in my kitchen making Thomas's favorite pancakes. He was coming for brunch when the doorbell rang. Through my security camera, I saw David standing on my porch. He looked terrible. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, his face gaunt. He'd aged 5 years in 3 months. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Mom, I need to talk to you." "About what, David?" "About what I've learned." For the first time in years, he looked me directly in the eyes. "I've lost everything. The house, the business, most of my friends. Sophia filed for divorce last month." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "But Mom, losing everything taught me something. It taught me that you were right, about all of it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I finally understand what I threw away. Not the money, you. I threw away the one person who loved me unconditionally, and I did it for people and things that disappeared the moment I couldn't pay for them anymore." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated vulnerability that had characterized our relationship for so long. But this felt different. "What do you want from me, David?" "Nothing out," he said, and I believed him. "I'm not here to ask for money or help or forgiveness. I'm here to tell you that you were the best mother you knew how to be, and I was the worst son I could possibly be." "David, let me finish. I'm also here to tell you that I've started going to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where I blame everyone else for my problems. And I've learned that the man I became isn't the man Dad would have wanted me to be." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box. "I got this back for you." Inside was Robert's watch, restored and polished to its original beauty. "I don't want your forgiveness," he continued. "I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to have this back because it represents everything I should have been and wasn't." I took the watch, my hands trembling slightly. "Are you happy, Mom?" he asked. "Yes," I said truthfully, "I am." "Good. That's all I wanted to know." He turned to leave, then paused. "Mom, I know it doesn't matter now, but I do love you. The real you, not what you can do for me. It just took losing everything to figure out the difference." As he walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. Not in who he had been, but in who he might be becoming. That evening, Thomas and I sat in my garden watching the sunset and talking about our children. He had 2 daughters who called him every week and visited every month. "Do you think David will be all right?" he asked. I considered the question, thinking about the man who had stood on my porch that morning, broken but honest, humble, but not defeated. "I think," I said slowly, "that for the first time in his life, David has the chance to become the person he was always capable of being. And if he does," I smiled, feeling the weight of Robert's watch on my wrist, no longer a symbol of betrayal but of hope, "then maybe someday we'll have the relationship we both deserve." The most beautiful thing about this story isn't that I got revenge on my son. It's that I finally learned to love myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. And in doing that, I gave David something more valuable than money. I gave him the chance to become a man worth respecting. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to face their consequences and grow from them. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable their worst impulses. At 70 years old, I learned that it's never too late to rewrite your story. I just had to be brave enough to pick up the pen. If my story resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth. And remember, you are never too old, never too late, and never too anything to demand the love and respect you deserve. Your story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to write a better ending.